You guys, the kitten slept all the way till 6 a.m. this morning. So many tongue twisters today. Someone is hammering next door, and I don't know if you can hear it, but I'm just gonna hope not, because they've been at it for hours, and I don't have time for this.
Modern environmentalism is based on several false dichotomies, meaning that society has manufactured opposites where none exist. For example, society and wilderness, humans and nature. But nature and wilderness are constructed categories, the parameters of which we have historically defined to not include ourselves, our cities, or our agriculture, when in reality, all things are part of a global ecology that is deeply interconnected. Similarly, we have constructed a divide between scientific knowledge and traditional or indigenous ecological knowledge. Scientific knowledge, for the most part, has historically upheld the separation between humans and nature, whereas indigenous knowledge from all over the world recognizes the interconnectedness. So today I want to talk about these different indigenous ways of thinking about the human relationship with nature and what we have to learn from it, even those at the forefront of environmental activism. It is important to recognize this divide that has been created because the separation of ourselves from nature deeply affects the way that we address environmental issues. I'm going to start with perhaps the most famous example, which is Buen Vivir or Sumac Cafe. The indigenous people of the Andes, which is modern-day Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and Argentina, their worldview is based on this idea of Sumac Cafe, which roughly translates to good living. It describes a way of life that is in harmony with communities and ourselves and with nature. And it promotes regeneration and regrowth of the natural world, as well as reciprocity. They believe that the goddess of the earth, Pachamama, embodies nature, and problems arise when people take too much from nature because they're taking too much from Pachamama. Oil extraction has really devastated the Amazon in Ecuador, which has caused deforestation and water contamination and indigenous land encroachment and illness amongst local communities. The increasing political outcry from indigenous groups and growing anti-neoliberal sentiment combined with the global economic crisis of 2008 resulted in a new constitution for Ecuador, which became the first in the world to legally acknowledge the rights of nature through this idea of Sumac Cafe. It specifically recognizes the inalienable rights of ecosystems to exist and to flourish, and gives people the authority to petition on the behalf of nature, as with other entities who cannot self-advocate, such as infants and children, corporations, municipalities, universities. Pretty common stuff. The Constitution also requires the government to remedy violations of those rights. Ecuador was under a lot of pressure at the time to pursue neoliberal development, which emphasized profit and commodification and economic growth. But in adopting this constitution, Ecuador was essentially rejecting that path and attempting another one that emphasized spirituality and ethics and their relationship with the earth. Sumac Cafe rejects the traditional view of nature as property which landowners have the right to damage or destroy. That view is part of the othering of nature that occurs in Western society. You know, the rules to protect the environment were historically set for the health and wellness of humanity and catered to humans of privilege. Those in power have long created others out of equals, like women and homosexuals and non-whites. In the same vein, nature is othered by laws that distinguish between subject and object to be owned. One thing I love to think about is what is a widely held belief today that we'll find appalling and unethical in 50 or 100 years, such as racism or sexism and homophobia. And for me, this is it. For centuries, we treated women and non-whites as slaves. We didn't recognize their value or their personhood. And it turns out we've been doing the same thing to nature all along as well. In 50 years, I hope that we will think of nature as no less of an object for our possession as women or non-white people. I would like to note here that there are many who say Buen Vivir / good living is a poor translation of Sumac Cafe, and the two are just not the same ontologically. They think that Sumac Cafe has been appropriated by politics, watered down by Western thinking for more easy translation and incorporation into Western modes of governance and Western cultural frameworks. It has been secularized, whereas in Indigenous thought, it is a deeply spiritual belief. In the same way that we have extracted natural resources, we have extracted ideas from Sumac Cafe and used them for our own benefit as buen vivir. I think part of the issue is just that the concept of Sumac Cafe is quite abstract, even amongst the Indigenous people it comes from. So translating it into a concrete concept for broad consumption is going to inherently be a little flawed and misinterpreted. However, it is important to recognize that this discussion is inherently tainted by Western modes of governance, academia, and culture, because that is the one I was brought up in, and probably most of you were too. This underlying principle that there is no dichotomy between nature and humans comes up over and over and over and over again in Indigenous worldviews and religious worldviews all over. There are parallels to Sumac Cafe all up and down the Americas that emphasize us as a part of an interconnected whole. There's the Maori concept of Kaitia Kitenga, in which humans and nature share ancestry and origins, and therefore protecting the environment respects the ancestors and secures the future. This kind of idea that nature is kin to humans, our ancestors are related to us in some direct way, is also very common. In Southern Africa, Ubuntu and other versions of that word roughly translates to I am because you are, which speaks to the interconnectedness of all life, because a person only exists alongside other people and other living things, and therefore what you do and what you are affects everyone else. Along the same vein, the Buddha taught that enlightenment comes from releasing attachment to individuality and ownership, because once you do that, you can see the oneness and interconnection of the universe. Harm done upon the earth is harm done upon humans, and there are deep Buddhist roots in compassion and balance and harmony. In fact, Buddhism, Taoism, Jainism, Sikhism, Hinduism, they all share a similar concept of a life essence or spirit that flows through all things, connecting all of us and our actions together. I know that all of this sounds a little bit like some kind of religious hippie shit, but you know, it can't be a coincidence that all of these different cultures from far corners of the world came to the same conclusion independently. In order to rebuild in a sustainable way, we need to recognize the interconnectedness of human well-being with the well-being of the planet. It's about rethinking our relationship with nature. Nature isn't just out there, far away, in the forest. It doesn't only exist in national parks. It's right here. It's the weeds in your garden. It's the spiders in your house. It's the trees in the median. It's your houseplants. It's your pets. It's you. The science of ecology doesn't leave much room for spirituality, but when you start to internalize this worldview and you start to see that every atom in the universe is in balance to create all of this, you can't help but think of it as nothing short of a miracle. And in challenging the way that society has taught you to think about nature, it's easier to also challenge the systems that brought us here. Systemic change also includes challenging our systems of thought, and that's why this conversation is important. So yeah, that's all for today. I hope you learned something. Please share this video with someone you think might find it interesting. Give it a like, subscribe, and the links to follow me on Instagram and Twitter will be below. Bye.